Not a designer. You're a decorator. There's a difference, and you should learn it before you embarrass yourself in front of a real client. My creative director said that to me on a Tuesday afternoon, loud enough for the entire open floor to hear, when I slid my campaign deck across the conference table. I had worked on that deck for 11 days straight. I remember because I counted them later, the way you'd count things that hurt you. I didn't slam the folder shut. I didn't cry. I felt something go very quiet inside me, the way a room goes quiet right before someone says something that changes everything. And I thought, clearly. The way I always think most clearly when I'm furious. He just made a very expensive mistake. His name was my boss. I'll call him that because that's all he ever really was, even when I was young enough and naive enough to think of him as a mentor. Let me back up. I graduated from the Maryland Institute College of Art with a degree in graphic design and a portfolio that got me 3 job offers before I crossed the stage to pick up my diploma. I chose the smallest of the 3 companies, a boutique creative agency in Washington, D.C., Caldwell and Strand. I chose it because my boss personally called me, not emailed me, calls me, and spent 40 minutes telling me how much they valued young female creatives and how they were building something different from the big agencies. He had this way of speaking, warm and specific and urgent, like whatever he was saying was just for you. I believed him. I was 23. I believe him being honest about that. Callaway and Strand had 12 employees when I joined. By the time I left, it had 41. In those 4 years, I had designed the visual identity for 3 of our top 5 clients. I had built our entire brand system library from scratch, the one every junior designer now uses as a template. I had art-directed 2 campaigns that won regional Addy Awards. Our revenue had grown by almost 60%, and I knew, because I was the one building the pitch decks, exactly which clients had come in because of work with my fingerprints on it. I was being paid $52,000 a year. My male colleague, who joined 8 months after me, who I had personally trained on our internal design system, was being paid $74,000. I found out the way you always find out things like that by accident. He left a pay stub on the printer. He was horrified. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I meant it. It wasn't. I went to my boss the next morning. I had my portfolio printed and bound. I had a list of every major account I had touched, the revenue each had generated, the awards the work had won. I was composed. I was professional. I had rehearsed every sentence. He barely looked at the portfolio. "You're talented," he said, leaning back in his chair in that way he had, the way that communicated he was about to say something he thought was generous. "But you have to understand the market. You're 27. You don't have the kind of relationships that justify that salary. Clients want to work with someone who has gravity, someone established, gravity." I thought about that word for a long time afterward. Gravity meant being a 44-year-old man who played golf with the clients I sourced and prepped and never got credited for landing. "Give it another year," he said. "Prove yourself a little more. Then we'll talk." I had been proving myself for 4 years. I understood, right then, that there was no number of proofs that was ever going to be enough. Not for me. Not in that office. I said, "Okay." I smiled. I went back to my desk. And then I opened my contract. People ask me sometimes why I stayed as long as I did. Why someone who went to a good school and had a good portfolio and knew her own worth would spend 4 years undervalued. It's a fair question. The answer is the same one it always is. I thought if I was good enough for long enough, they would eventually see it. I thought excellence was a language everyone spoke. I didn't yet understand that some people hear excellence and call it expectation. Some people see a woman doing extraordinary work and decide the extraordinary part is just her baseline. I was also, if I'm being completely honest, a little afraid. Callaway and Strand was not a famous agency, but it was a real one, with real clients and a real reputation, and my boss had a way of making you feel like you were lucky to be there. That was the most sophisticated thing about him. He didn't steal your confidence all at once. He did it in small increments, a comment here, a dismissal there, until you were genuinely unsure whether you were as good as you thought you were. The decorator comment was the last installment. I read my contract that night at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my reading glasses and a yellow legal pad. I had signed it when I was 23 and barely looked at it because I was so excited to have the job. Now I read every clause with the specific attention of someone looking for something. I wasn't sure what, I was just reading. I found it on page 7. Callaway and Strand had engaged me under a hybrid classification that I had never thought much about. I received a regular paycheck, but I was technically contracted as a creative consultant on a project-by-project basis, not a full-time W-2 employee. At the time, my boss had explained it as a flexibility arrangement, something about how the agency structured creative roles differently from operational ones. He had said it benefited me because it gave me more autonomy. I had believed him because at 23, I didn't know that what it actually did was save the agency roughly 15% in employer-side payroll taxes and exempt them from offering me certain benefits that full employees received. Here's the other thing it did. The thing my boss either didn't know or was gambling I would never find out. There was no intellectual property assignment clause in my contract. Under standard employment law, work created by a W-2 employee within the scope of their job belongs to the employer automatically. That's called work for hire doctrine, and most people who've ever had a regular job have unknowingly signed their creative output over to their company just by accepting a paycheck. But I wasn't classified as a W-2 employee. I was a contractor. And under U.S. KME, copyright law, a contractor retains ownership of their creative work, unless there is a written agreement explicitly transferring those rights to the client or company. My contract had no such agreement. I sat with that for a long time. I read the clause 4 times, then I read it a 5th time. Then I called my college roommate who had gone to Georgetown Law and was now at a firm that handled intellectual property cases. I texted her at 11 p.m. I said, "I need you to look at something. I think I might own my portfolio." She called me back in 6 minutes. We met for coffee the next morning, and I slid my contract across the cafe table the same way I had slid my deck across the conference table the day before. She read it in silence. She has this quality, a total stillness when she's reading something important. Like the world just stops for her. Then she looked up. "This is a 2018 consulting agreement template," she said. "I've seen this exact format. The IP section is completely missing. There's a confidentiality clause, but nothing that transfers creative ownership." She turned the page. "He didn't have a lawyer draft this, did he?" It wasn't a question. He had told me once, in the early days, that he tried to keep legal overhead low. Said good relationships were better protection than contracts. I had thought that was wisdom. It was just cheapness. "Who created the deliverables on your major accounts?" she asked. I gave her the list. The full rebrand for a regional healthcare network, the complete visual identity system for a DC-based tech nonprofit that had since expanded nationally, the campaign for a luxury real estate developer that ran across the city for 8 months. I had art directed and designed every element. Primary creator, in each case, was me. "Then you hold the copyright," she said quietly. "The agency has been using your intellectual property for 4 years without a proper license to do so." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cafe air conditioning. We didn't waste time after that. My roommate filed for expedited copyright registration with the U.S. Copyright Office on 3 of my largest bodies of work. The filing fees came to just over $1,000. It was the most important money I've ever spent. Then we built the rest of the case. The consulting classification wasn't just a financial shortcut. In legal terms, it was a potential misclassification. Specifically, treating someone as an independent contractor when they functionally operate as an employee is a violation of IRS guidelines and Department of Labor regulations. The consequences are significant: back taxes, penalties, potential liability for unpaid benefits. My boss had made a decision that saved him a few $1,000s a year and had, in doing so, created a 6-figure exposure for his company. I also had emails. 4 years of them. Emails where he'd told me to handle client calls he was supposed to handle. Emails where he'd forwarded me client complaints and said, "Deal with it." Emails where he'd taken credit in writing for creative decisions I had made, including one where he'd forwarded my concept brief to a client under his name and removed mine from the header entirely. I had kept every single one, backed up to a personal drive, not because I knew I'd need them someday, but because I am, at my core, someone who keeps records. My roommate looked at the email folder and said slowly, "This is a very strong case. I want to be clear about what I was not doing. I was not looking to destroy anyone. I was not doing this because I was bitter, though I had every right to be. I was doing it because I had spent 4 years being underpaid, misclassified, and quietly erased from my own work. And I had just discovered that the same mechanism my boss had used to diminish me was the mechanism that had accidentally preserved my rights. The cheap contract that was meant to keep me small had forgotten to take anything from me. The intellectual property I had built was still mine. And I was finally going to own that fact out loud. Callaway and Strand's biggest client was a company I'll call Meridian, a DC-based property development group that had hired the agency 2 years prior for a full brand overhaul. I had designed everything: the logo, the color system, the typography, the website, the signage standards, the pitch presentation that had won them a major DC zoning approval. Meridian was the agency's largest account, billing over $400,000 annually. They were also in the middle of a high-profile expansion campaign that was using assets I had created. The expansion launch was scheduled for a Thursday evening reception at a renovated property in Georgetown. My boss had organized it as a showcase event. 30 or so clients and press contacts, a kind of victory lap. I knew about it because I had designed the invitation. I bought a ticket through the development company's public RSVP link 2 weeks before the event. My boss didn't know I was coming. The Georgetown property was beautiful in the way that old money likes to be beautiful. High ceilings, wide windows, the Potomac visible from the rooftop. The rebrand I had created was everywhere. The signage in the lobby used my typeface choices. The presentation running on the screens in the main hall used my color palette, my compositions, my layout grids. Standing there seeing it, I felt something complicated. Pride, because it was genuinely good work. And anger, clean and focused, because there was nowhere in that room that said my name. My boss was near the front when I walked in. He saw me and went very still in the specific way people go. Still when they're calculating. He crossed the room toward me. His face was doing something between a smile and a warning. "What are you doing here?" he said. It wasn't a question. I said, "I was invited. I'm a stakeholder in this project." He lowered his voice. "This isn't the time. We can set up a meeting." I said, "I've been requesting meetings for 4 years. This works better." I walked past him toward the Meridian principal, the man who ran the development group and had been my boss's primary contact on the account. He was a direct, practical person who cared primarily about outcomes. We had spoken on the phone a handful of times over the course of the project. Though my boss had a habit of stepping in front of me during those calls the way someone steps in front of a door, I introduced myself by my full name and my actual role, the designer and art director who had built the Meridian visual identity system. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I thought you were a junior on the account." I said, "No, I was the lead. I can show you the copyright registrations." I handed him a folder. Federal copyright certificates for the logo system, the website design, and the brand standards manual, all registered to my name, all time-stamped within the past 3 weeks. Below those, a 1-page legal summary my roommate had prepared, outlining the consulting contract classification, the absence of an IP assignment clause, and what that meant for the assets Meridian was currently using in their expansion campaign. He read it. He read it again. Around us, people were making conversation and drinking wine and admiring the space I had designed. My boss had materialized a few feet away, close enough to hear, not close enough to interrupt without making a scene. The Meridian principal looked up from the folder. He looked at my boss. He looked back at me. "Are you telling me this agency doesn't have legal rights to the assets we're using?" "That is exactly what I'm telling you," I said. "And I have the copyright registrations to support it. I'm not here to blow up your launch. I'm here because you deserve to know what you've been sold." My boss stepped forward. He said something about a misunderstanding, about how these things were complicated, about how I was technically still under contract. His voice had that tone it always got when he was cornered, louder and faster and slightly too smooth. The Meridian principal held up one hand. He had the particular stillness of someone who has negotiated a lot of deals and knows when he's been put in a bad position. He turned to my boss and said, "You should have led with this." Then he turned to me and said, "What do you need?" I had a proposal in the folder. I had spent 2 weekends writing it. It outlined the structure of a freelance licensing agreement that would allow Meridian to continue using existing brand assets for a fee paid directly to me, the actual copyright holder, along with a formal contract for the completion of the expansion campaign work currently in progress. I had priced it based on current market rates for senior-level brand identity work in the DC market, rates that were considerably higher than what Callaway and Strand had been billing for my labor. He read the proposal while my boss stood there. He said, "This is fair." He offered to connect me with their in-house counsel to formalize the agreement the following week. He also said quietly that he would be evaluating whether his company's relationship with Callaway and Strand was still the right one, given what he had just learned about how the account had been managed. My boss caught up with me near the exit. His face had moved past calculation into something rawer. "You want to do this?" he said. "I made your career." I thought about the 43-hour weeks and the credits stripped from my emails and the decorator comment delivered to a room full of my colleagues and the 4 years of being told to wait, Prove yourself. Give it more time. You borrowed my career, I said. And you forgot to get it in writing. I walked out. The night air was cool off the river. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute and let myself feel it. All of it. The fear and the vindication and the exhaustion and something underneath all of it that was starting to feel, for the first time in a long time, like relief. The weeks after that were not simple. My boss threatened to sue for breach of contract. My roommate responded with a comprehensive letter outlining the misclassification exposure, the missing IP clause, and the email evidence of credit attribution practices that would make for very uncomfortable discovery. She also noted that we had not yet filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and that the decision to do so remained open. He did not sue. The Meridian licensing agreement was finalized 3 weeks later. The terms were fair and I accepted them. The same week, 2 other clients I had worked with through the agency reached out to me directly after word circulated in a way it does in a relatively small professional community. One of them said, very straightforwardly, that they had always assumed I was the senior person on their account and had been confused about the billing structure. He asked if I was available to take on their next project independently. I said yes. I had registered my own design studio, Lumen Creative, with the state of Maryland 6 days after the Georgetown event. It took about 20 minutes online and cost $160. My boss sent a long email that tried to be conciliatory and ended up being accusatory. I read it once and archived it without responding. There was nothing in it I needed. I want to say something about my colleague, the one with the pay stub. He reached out to me after everything became known in the way things become known. He was apologetic in a way that was genuine and slightly agonized. I told him, and I meant it completely, that none of it was his fault. He was paid what he was offered. That's not a character failure. It's just what happens when systems are allowed to operate without transparency. He asked if I would consult on a project he was developing independently outside the agency. I said yes at my actual rate, which he accepted without negotiating. Some things I didn't expect: how long the adrenaline would last, how tired I would be when it wore off, how the anger, which I had treated like fuel for months, would eventually need somewhere to go. I am someone who tends to intellectualize things as a way of managing them, and for a long time, I focused on the legal strategy and the business formation and the practical steps, because those were things I could control. The part where I had given 4 years of genuine love to work that was then used against me, that part took longer to sit with. I think about the brand standards manual sometimes. I built it because I believed in doing thorough work, because I knew it would outlast me at the agency and wanted it to be useful for whoever came next. It was the kind of work you do when you care about something beyond your own credit. My boss used it as a selling point for 18 months without ever mentioning my name. That manual is legally mine now. So is every font combination and every color specification and every spacing rule in it. Callaway & Strand has stopped using it. I know because a former colleague told me, sheepishly, that they're rebuilding it from scratch with a new junior designer who is, I hope, being paid fairly. Lumen Creative has been operating for 8 months. I have 4 clients, all direct relationships. My rate is what I should have been paid 4 years ago, plus what I've learned since then. I work from a studio space I rent with 2 other independent designers. And on most mornings, I walk in and feel something that took me a long time to name. It's not satisfaction, exactly. It's more like accuracy, like finally being the correct size in the correct space. My former boss still runs Callaway & Strand. I hear things occasionally through the professional network that cities like DC create, whether you want them to or not. I don't wish him harm. What I wish is simpler than that. I wish the designers working there now are paid what they're worth. I wish they read their contracts. I wish someone had told me, at 23, that a company enthusiastic about keeping legal overhead low is a company that is willing to bet you won't read the fine print. Read the fine print, especially the part about who owns what you make, because sometimes the thing they forgot to put in the contract is the thing that gives you everything back. I am not a decorator. I never was. And now I have the copyright registration to prove it. People sometimes ask me if I regret how it all ended. They mean the Georgetown event, the folder, the look on my boss's face when the Meridian principal read the copyright registration and said out loud in front of everyone, "This is fair." They ask it the way people ask things they already know the answer to, because what they really want to know is whether I feel guilty. I don't. But that took some time to arrive at, honestly. Here's what I've come to understand about the 4 years I spent at that agency. The treatment I received wasn't random cruelty. It was a system operating exactly as designed. My boss paid me less because the structure allowed it. He stripped my name from pitch decks because no one had ever stopped him. He called me a decorator in front of the room because he had calculated, correctly, that I needed the job more than I needed my dignity on that particular Tuesday. Every single thing he did had a logic to it, and the logic only broke down when I stopped accepting its premises. That's the part I think about most now. Not the legal strategy, not the copyright filing, not even the moment the Meridian principal said you should have led with this to my boss. It's the moment at my kitchen table at 11 p.m. when I decided to actually read the document I had signed 4 years earlier. That decision cost me nothing except time. Everything that followed came from that. There's something I want to say carefully because I don't think it gets said enough. Being competent and being protected are not the same thing. I spent 4 years believing that if I was good enough, the good would eventually be enough. It isn't a naive belief exactly. It's just incomplete. Skill matters, work ethic matters, but skill without self-knowledge, without the willingness to understand the structures you're operating inside of, leaves you exposed in ways that have nothing to do with how talented you are. My boss didn't undervalue me because he failed to see my talent. He undervalued me because he correctly identified that I hadn't yet learned to protect it. My roommate, who spent 3 years in law school learning to read exactly the kind of contract I had signed without reading, once told me that most legal disputes aren't won or lost in the courtroom. They're won or lost in the paperwork, years before anyone files anything. She was right. The clause that saved me, the missing IP assignment section, had been absent from my contract since 2018. The advantage had existed the entire time. I just hadn't looked. I think about my colleague sometimes, the one with the pay stub on the printer. He didn't create the system either. He was just inside it, same as me, benefiting from an asymmetry he hadn't asked for and didn't fully understand. That matters. Unfair systems don't require villains in every role. They just require enough people not asking questions. What I built after, Lumen Creative, the client relationships, the rate that finally reflects what I actually do, none of it appeared because I got lucky or because the right person finally noticed me. It appeared because I stopped waiting to be seen and started building the conditions under which I couldn't be overlooked. That's not a revenge story. That's just cause and effect, played out slowly enough that it looked like patience. I am not a decorator. I designed that room in Georgetown from the floor to the ceiling, and then I walked back into it in my own name and claimed what belonged to me. If there is a lesson in any of this, it is simply that know what you've built, know what it's worth, and always, always read the fine print.